I was muted. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another session of Microsoft Zero to Hero and the last session of .NET July. We had a very amazing month together. We started with Blazor and we want to finish with testing Blazor applications. As you already know, we are part of Microsoft Learn community. It is a community driven by community members, and we are trying to bring experts and learners together to build up a better community with you guys and have progress in our goals, ambitions, and everything. I am Shahab, the guy who happens to be a software engineer. I am the host for tonight's session, and I hope you're having a great time wherever you are on the planet, whether it's morning or evening, watching the stream live or recorded. I have something to share, so go check out our new portal that you could get more information. It's microsofthero.com, and you could see what are the confirmed sessions and what do we have scheduled already. Like the speakers are going to be talking in August, September, October, and November. There'll be more sessions coming, and you could check it out yourself. You could also see how you could get in touch with us and follow us on social medias and LinkedIn, YouTube, and X. Don't forget that. Back to today's session. So we wanted to start with Blazor and finish with Blazor, and I couldn't think of anyone better than one of the contributors of the bUnit, which is a testing library for Blazor components, and a Microsoft MVP and a very great developer. And without further ado, I would like to invite Steven on stage. Hi, Steven.
Hey, hello.
Thanks for joining us.
For a beautiful introduction. One of them was a lie, I guess. I mean, I'm Microsoft MVP, but I'm a horrible developer.
I doubt that.
Ask my clients. Ask my clients.
Well, that's just. I'm doing good. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. Saturday evening. It's good. Good time. I'm ready.
It's good. And like one weekend, every weekend we had like some .NET and C# topics, and it was, as a .NET enthusiast, it was amazing for me. I hope the audience enjoyed it as well. So
I screwed up my setup. Yeah, but I will fix that in a second.
A little bit.
Okay. Good enough. Good enough.
Yeah, it's good enough. Good enough is always good.
Ah, boy. Okay. I'm ready.
Oh, okay. So it's yours. One thing I forgot to tell the audience is that we, as the other sessions, we also have a giveaway. It is like 50% voucher on all Microsoft exams, whether it's fundamental or advanced, and it goes to whoever asks the best questions. And we will usually ask the speaker to choose that because we don't want pressure on ourselves. So good luck with that.
Perfect.
Sorry.
So my PayPal me address I will just show in a second.
Okay, that's great. Okay, then the stage is yours, and
thank you.
Good luck. You're welcome. Thank you.
Perfect. Yes. So not sure if I go to full screen or not. Let's go. There are not many slides, so I'm normally someone who does sometimes slides and sometimes not. But today is all about coding in an IDE because I guess that's what people prefer and what I also prefer. The best thing about this is you can just ask me questions and I can just code it, and you can see how horrible I am in live coding. Always looks so nice if people do this in YouTube and whatnot, but it's not easy. You screw this up a lot. Anyhow, we will talk a bit about bUnit, unit testing especially. We will have some overlap with integration testing, and we also slightly cover the topic of end-to-end tests. But for the majority of that talk, we will talk about unit testing in Blazor, or component testing would be a different word if you want to say so. Short introduction to me. Yeah, I'm Steven Giesel. I am Microsoft MVP. I do stream, I wouldn't say regularly with Igil because that would be a lie. We do this every 5th or 6th week because our schedule is a bit busy. You can reach out either via LinkedIn, Blue Sky, via email, whatever you prefer, if you have any questions, or just hang out on our GitHub page and ask questions there. Now, for this talk, for the next, let's say, 55 minutes, I assume you have some ideas what Blazor is. I really hope. If not, you can see the magic now. And I also assume you have a bit of an understanding what unit testing is. that is kind of, the bar we have to cross so the talk makes sense. Okay, what is bUnit? Why are you here? What are we going to do? So basically, bUnit is just a fancy library which gives you a lot of utility to write component tests for your Blazor components. So the basic idea is you have your Blazor component, you throw it against our stuffs, we do some magic with it, and you can then assert certain, conditions like your markup, your state, whatever you want. Also, there's a lot of utility for orchestration. That is basically what bUnit is. I will show, of course, in examples how, the magic helps you. And we have two basically authors or maintainers. This is Egil Hansen, who started that whole thing in, God, I'm lying right now, it's 2020. We can check out the GitHub page in a second. And I joined a year, 2 years later, since 2022. Yeah, but early of 2022, I guess. I basically contributed, and it started, how so often with smaller contributions, with bug reports, and at some point, I'm in now, and now I can go out. Also, maybe if we have the time, so my plan for today, but obviously, please always ask questions. This can go in a direction you want. It's hopefully I know the stuff I'm showing, so the session is for you. So the idea would be we show how to make a basic bUnit test. We show how to do, the service container inputs. How can you stop components? And if I have a bit of time, we can maybe even talk about V2 if this is from interest. If not, that's also fine. So what does bUnit do? What does it offer you? Why should you use it? There is no alternative, as I know. There's only one kind of replacement you could use, but yeah, we come to that later. The thing is, we can define components under test in C# or Razor syntax. So if you know XUnit or NUnit, you just write C# code. But your Blazor component, more often than not, is Razor code. So why not writing your test code in the same style and language as your production code? That's the cool thing. I'll show you in a second how that works. We can verify outcomes with an HTML comparer. So there are semantics in HTML which are not necessarily bound to, two strings are the same or they're not the same, and therefore the result is false. You can have semantic HTML, which is semantically the same, but syntactically they're different. Also, I will show this later. We have the lifecycle events on render, on initialize, and whatnot. I guess you know them by heart. We can emulate them. That's good. We can interact with the outcome. We can trigger event handlers. We can pass parameters. There is a lot of stuff, and I will show basically all of those points more or less. And yes, we can mock services, JavaScript runtime, blah, 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 blah. So a lot of things we can do. So as you can see, there is freedom of choice for everyone here. But the best part for me is your bUnit test. It feels like a regular unit test. And it's also, to some extent, it feels like a regular production code component because we can write it like that. You will see in a second why this is so cool. When I ask, or when I say about, hey, this is what bUnit offers, the second question, which should always be answered, is what does it not offer? Where is the limit of bUnit? When doesn't it make sense to use it? bUnit, even though the name might be a bit misleading, is not a general purpose framework. And with general purpose framework, I mean things like NUnit or XUnit or mstest, where you just write your test in that framework and it does something for you. bUnit is just a library. It just brings a lot of utility, helper functions, helper classes to work inside your XUnit, NUnit, or mstest, and there make your assertions. Make it easier handling components. That is what it does. Also, we are not a browser. This is not an end-to-end test. We are not something which, for example, that is very important. We're not directly executing JavaScript. You can assert that JavaScript was called. We are also not a browser in the sense of, hey, if you click on an ahref element, that doesn't mean you are navigating to that page. In Playwright, obviously, you would do that because there's the whole browser involved, there's the server involved, but it's not what's going to happen in bUnit. So bUnit more has to focus on unit integration testing and less so on end-to-end testing. And that brings me to the point, like, why not Selenium or Playwright, which are very well-known E2E testing frameworks. And in comparison to, bUnit, they're slower. Again, you can define slow. On the right side, you see some executions of my own blog, which is written in Blazor and is tested by bUnit. And you can see a lot of the tests that are only a few milliseconds. So it's kind of quick. End-to-end tests normally are very expensive to maintain and build in the first place. And yeah, they're not really meant for unit testing. They are meant for end-to-end testing. Okay, enough with the slides. Let's go into code. So let's move it here and put this back up here. So this is I would say, the typical hello world component of Blazor. That's your typical counter. I will not execute that right now because I feel like everyone knows it anyway. You click a counter, it increases by 1. Wow. Okay, let's go. How do we do bUnit testing? There are 2 ways. Either A, you're using the bUnit template. So we have a template. You can just, .NET new and then bUnit template. Or we do this manually. And I want to show it the second way here. So this is my testing project. It has just some component. It has this counter, as you might know. It has an alert component. It has kind of a bit of stuff. Okay. So what I do is I just add any project. And I use XUnit because this is my favorite testing framework. But feel free to use whatever you want. We are calling this bUnit testing.tests because I'm great at naming, as you might imagine. Let's go. So this is a normal, XUnit test. And we have to do 2 things. The first thing is, obviously, we might want to add bUnit itself. So if I go in here, you can see there's XUnit, there is coverlet, there's the .NET SDK in a somewhat outdated version. Doesn't matter. So what we also need is bUnit. So if I just type in this version 1.4, that is the latest on version 1. So we are almost good to go. Now we could write our first test. But I want to show a small twist, which we also highlight in our documentation. I want to write the stuff in Razor. So how do we do that? Now this is a bit of how the compiler works internally. But if you go up here, you can see there's a Microsoft project SDK. If you go, for example, into the production grade application, you can see there's SDK web. Nice. That thing basically triggers a different pipeline depending on what you're taking. And what we are taking is Razor. And as you might imagine, that enables us to write Razor components because Razor components itself, they're not really special. So yes, you can write HTML. Yes, you can do, like these add code and whatnot annotations. But what the compiler does, it lowers that thing by our source code generator to plain old C# code. So at the end, you have C# code. But someone has to do that, and you have to tell the compiler, please do that. And this is the way how you would do that. Okay, so what we can do now is, let's leave that for the time being. I can show you also how to write the normal C# test and the Razor test. So let's add the Razor test. We call that, I don't know, beautiful naming tests. Amazing, huh? Yes, let's do that. And as you can see here, that is a normal Razor component. Now, I forgot one thing. Obviously, we have to add the reference to our project. Yes, that makes sense. So let's add this here. What it does under the hood is you just have this project reference here in your CS project file. Nothing really fancy. Okay, back to the test. The majority of the utility we provide is basically hidden behind a single class we call test context that you can see here in bUnit. Here is the majority of magic, let's say 95%. So you have 2 ways. You can either inherit that thing or you new it up per test. We recommend this way because it's just easier to write tests. Anyhow, your tests, like each single fact you have, should be independent of each other. So if you follow that rule or follow that pattern, you're good to go just to use a test context. Okay, there we go. Now, let's write our first test. So that's XUnit. So let's say fact. And we want to have the typical, beautiful naming test. No, we want to have the typical, we click the counter and we increase it by 1. And so, we should go from 0 to 1. Example. So clicking counter increases count by 1. Now, why do we have bUnit? And I want to show you something, because you could argue, hey, it's nice that you have utility, but maybe I want to do it myself. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. You have this counter here. That's this guy. And obviously, what you can do is you can call cut. So this is our way of always naming things. Like you have the service under test, and therefore, here component under test. What you could do is you can just have a new counter. You can see this is using testing components pages that refers to this one here on the left. And you can just new that up. That's not a problem. As I said, Blazor components itself, they are not really special. They are lowered or source code generated towards a normal C# class. So you have now your component. That wouldn't be an issue. But as you can see, if you just type in cut dot, so you want to see the instance methods on that specific type, well, there is not much. There is the stuff from object, probably not helpful. And then we have this set parameters async. So, okay, fair enough, but how should I, do lifecycle events? That's the problem. Blazor components itself are sheer or mere placeholders. They're just containers. They do not render themselves. There is the renderer, and the renderer takes that thing and renders them. The set parameters async you see here, that is used for component-to-component communication. So, if you pass down something to a child component, internally, this guy is called. That is all that is publicly available, because this is all two components need for each other to communicate effectively. Normally, downwards you use parameters, and upwards you use events, and that's how you can do it. And this guy alone is absolutely enough. So this is where bUnit comes in. bUnit basically overrides the renderer and gives you more and more hooks into the renderer to control what's going on. Now we do this. Well, let's remove this guy here, because yeah, you can see it already. GitHub Copilot is really, really smart. We have a render component call. So we can also just do render. And into the render, we can just say this is a counter component, because, that's how I called it. And now I have to provide, as you can see here, render tree builder. That's a fancy word of saying, hey, provide me the HTML of the thing you want to render. And this is where the Blazor component is so good, because what you can do is you can just say, hey, I have that counter. And as you can see, this is HTML code. I didn't have to escape it in any way or another. I can just write this one and we're done. And as you can see, we get something out which we call internally rendered component. So this is basically, well, what the name suggests. You have a component that was rendered. And with this thing, you can do basically a lot of magic. So if we go back to our counter component, you can see, okay, what do we want to do? We have here the button, which increments the counter by 1. And we have a P element, which basically reflects the outward state. So there are always two ways you can test things. That is the observable state, and this is the internal state. Now, this is like a trick question, but what should you use? Well, probably the observable state. You can, I will show this in a brief second later, you can observe internal state. Sure, that, we allow that, that's no problem. But ideally, you try to use the observable state. That keeps your tests just more stable. You're less brittle on the implementation details, but more on what does an actual user of your component really see and observe. And that's most of the times better. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to get that guy. We want to click it, and we want to assert that this one here, the current count, is increased by 1. That's all we want to do. Now, this one, as you can see, this is an ironic component of counter, represents that component and all its siblings. That's what it is. And if you ever worked with end-to-end test frameworks, he's so good, isn't he? Like, maybe we should just use Copilot, and I'm just, make bad jokes in the background. Now, let's remove this for the time being, because what I want to show is we have here the button element. If you work with end-to-end test frameworks, normally what you're using to take something from your HTML is you use CSS selectors. So you just describe the path downwards to that specific element. We are using now a button. If this is good or not, we will see in a second. Okay, once we have the button, we can just say, okay, let's click on that guy. And here is also something which is very important. I want to make that clear from the get-go. This is, for the lack of better words, this is not a physical click. If you use something like click or change or whatnot, it just tries to find an on-click event, on-change event, on input, you name it, and invoke that function. That doesn't necessarily mean that it does perform a real click. So if you have something like an href to somewhere, you could in a browser obviously click on it and you would navigate to that path. Call it weather, yeah, never mind. If you would try the same now with bUnit, you would get an exception because basically bUnit would tell you, hey, your ahref element, that doesn't have an on-click event handler. What should I click here? There's nothing to click. So bear in mind that if you use something like click, change, or whatnot, that is just the one-to-one representation of the events you are decorating your HTML with. That is very important. Okay, let's remove this for the time being. Pop up. If we clicked it, well, now we have to make our assertion. How do we do assertion? We can do the same here. But now I do a small trick. So I could do, let's say exactly. Oh, that was really good. Exactly what I really wanted. Because you could just ask for a p element. That is possible. You can just ask for p element. You could also do this. So you're just asking the system, hey, give me any element where there's an attribute with the name role, and the value of that attribute is status. You don't really mind, what it is. It could be a p element. It can be a span element. It doesn't matter. The important bit is that you want to have tests that are very descriptive and are not bound too much into implementation details. Probably you don't care so much if this is a p element or span element or div element. The important bit is that you have a role and you want to get this by role. We even offer a completely packaged extension to bUnit just for doing this, like find by role, find by label name, all of these kinds of stuff, so that you're not necessarily bound to your implementation details. Now, if we have this guy, what we can do is we can get the text content. This is this one. And then we can say markup matches. So we can just ask for, hey, this one should have now a current count of 1. And that is our first test. Markup matches, and this is also something very, very cool, is literally, and this is what I had very much in the beginning, semantically comparing this guy to whatever is right now in your text content. Why is this important? I will show you in a second. So now we have this guy. I can go to my test explorer. As you can see here, I have this one here. I can run that test and it's green. Wow, live coding 101 done. Cool. That is our first simple test. Now, a few things I want to show that are really, really cool and make probably your life a bit easier. Now, this is just a test, XUnit. So what you can do is you can, for example, go here, make a debug point, and attach your debugger. So after the click, let's put it in here. I can just, go in here, make a breakpoint. Let's jump over to the click, and now let's jump over the click itself. And you can see we are in here, which makes testing so much easier because you can really go step by step through your component code. That is amazing. Not only that, if you go out here again, now we are going into external X sources, which you can see is probably the embed callback, blah, blah, blah. That is now Blazor internal stuff. Not so much important. The important bit is this guy. We can just jump over. And we have a lot of things where you can inspect even what's going on. You can even, if you really want, show the markup, you see? And Writer is so good and renders that stuff. Obviously, there's no style class, but you can see what is really, really going on. You can even see the raw content. And it makes it so much easier to really fathom what's going on into your code versus an end-to-end test where you just have the observable universe and not really what's going on inside. So this is cool. You can debug your code. That's really tricky to do with an end-to-end test, at least not without putting much more elbow grease in it. Nice. Okay, now let's say there is a requirement where we want to say, hey, the counter component here should have a parameter where we basically define the starting point, so that someone can say, instead of starting by 0 all the time, I want to start by, I don't know, 10. So how do you do this? Like, the obvious way is you have a parameter, and I'm just very, very lazy. So what I do is I make this basically the parameter. Let's call that the same way. This is a get set. This is obviously increased by 1, and this is also increased by 1. Nice. Okay, that test obviously is still running. It's still green, hopefully. Amazing. But here comes the cool part. Here, I can just say, as you can see, my ID is already providing me the information. I can just say, okay, if the current count starts by 10, then obviously this guy has to start with 11. Easy. So as you can see, it's so trivial to write nice tests, or even, just a component on the test. If you have here a lot of child components and whatnot, it makes it so much easier to write. I will show you now the same version, but I'm using the old syntax. So let's be very, very simple. Here, that is our test context. We want to have the same. Yes. And I'm just lazy. I just take the name here. And what we can do here, it's pretty simple. We say like, yeah, the cut is render component, and this is our counter. Yeah, this one here. You want to put the parameter inside, and this is with our collection builder. So you can basically, for every parameter, you can just say, okay, we have the current count. Let's wrap that because it's really difficult to read. Exactly, current count is 10. Current count, or 19, it doesn't matter. And this is the same way. That would absolutely do the same. So if I'm lazy, copy paste that part out here, put it in here, call that class, let it compile. Well, then it's also green. So it's really up to you. We normally prefer this way because it's more idiomatic to Blazor, but up to you. I want to show you a different example and a test to that. Why this function here is so important. Because what you also can do is, obviously, you can just have text content. And then if you have shouldly or whatnot, you have like should be. I didn't have anything installed right now, so we can just as or equal. I don't use, I think that's the right one. And then we have current count 11. Oh, I'm so good. You can do this, obviously. So why is this important? Let's have another example where I just show you this one. So this is an alert component. It's just a simple one where you can just say, hey, something is an alert. So you have some, like a small pop-up or pop-over dialog where you can have some, CSS classes to control how it should look like. Okay, if we would write a test for this guy, we could do something like this. Let's go back to our tests. Oh, put this in. I already, prepared that. What we do is here again, we rendered this. We have the input. Again, it's very, very nice. We even have a child input, so child content. If we look at here, you have to provide this. And obviously, we want to do this in the same way we would do this with a real component. So in your real Blazor production code. That's the amazing thing. And then we basically say, hey, whatever comes out there should be of this div thingy. Okay, now we are using markup matches here. Why do we do that? You can see here a lot of classes. Fade, show, alert, alert warning. That is basically built up. Here you have the alert dismissible. You have a lot of stuff you can add here. You have this guy, and you can pass in your own kind if you want to. Imagine you are a browser. So let's run this test for the sake of it. I may have to compile that. Let me go to the tests. And yeah, there we go. There is my test. Let's run that. And that's green, obviously. Now, should this be different if, for example, I put the fade behind the show? No, it shouldn't. Your browser doesn't check the order here to know which CSS class it has to use. it uses basically the specificity inside of that thing. So rearranging those things is absolutely, your browser doesn't care. So your user doesn't care. You can see it also works. Also, it doesn't matter if the role attribute is, behind the class or in front of the class. It doesn't matter at all. But if you would use the text content itself, because it's literally, we're checking, is one string the same as another string? Yeah, obviously they will fail. But you don't want to necessarily let that fail, because semantically, your browser would absolutely behave the same and would output the same. So this is where markup matches is so important, because you can basically be independent of those implementation details, and your tests become more stable and less brittle. Now, sometimes there are use cases to do that. So maybe it's important to distinguish between, do you unit test your, let's say, enterprise application versus you are a component library maintainer and you want to unit test components. It might make sense for a unit test component, or for a component library, to test those specifics, and that is absolutely fine, and we give the means to do so. For an enterprise application, probably you don't care so much. You wouldn't even care that there's a diff. You would use roles and whatnot to make it independent of some details like div or p element, span element, whatnot. So it really depends what you want to do, but we prefer the markup matches because you are less bound to your implementation specifics. Cool. Now, two more things I want to show. First things first, services. Everyone loves the DI container. Who doesn't love DI containers? Because they're magic, they're cute. Overusing them, there's no regret. Let's put, what should we do? Okay, we can make it very, very easy. We can just make a very stupid service. Let's call that Steven service. With an interface even. Let's call it Steven service. No, let's call it calculator. I'm just kidding. So we have a calculator, and the calculator has a function called add. Yeah, that's good. And obviously, we also have an implementation of that, which is super, super straightforward. Okay, nice. The normal way you would do this is you go to your program CS, and you would just add that services, add scoped, and then you say like calculator, and then you have a calculator. And then you would use that in your code, obviously. Let's go here and there. Let's say here I have an inject on calculator. And then what you could do here is just say, I know that's not the best code you ever wrote, but there's the current count and 1. Okay, that will work in your production code. Obviously, we registered everything, but this will now fail if I just try to run that code. Let me remove this. Inside my test. So this guy, even though that would still be correct, we have the 10, our calculator does the right thing, this will fail. Let's let it run. And you can see, oopala, cannot provide a value for property calculator on type, blah, blah, blah. While your production code has obviously container, that is this guy, we don't. Well, we also have one, but our container is entirely disconnected from your production container. So what should you do in this moment? Well, that is a blessing in disguise, because you have the ability to mock out all the stuff you want. The easiest fix here would be simple. I can just say, hey, I have the services, and this is a test service project. That is basically the container you can build up. And here you can say add scoped. You can do literally the same. And yes, I could do this, where I just take the calculator and calculator, let that run now, and it would work as we expect. Well, what did I do? It doesn't. Obviously, I don't want to have this one. Yeah, you see, this one is failing now. It's this line, because let's go in. Here is a new line, as you can see. The text content would fail. This is this guy. There you see, new line, and then there are 4 spacings. But this one doesn't. You see, such trivial changes, even those like this one, make your test fail. So that's why text markup matches is most of the times better. So you see now it's working. If I do it again and wrap it, it would fail. So that said, I just removed that line. I hope I could transpire my point here. Good, let's remove that. So we have this one. Now it works after I played around too much. Beautiful. It could be that you have this guy here has many dependencies. You have to set up something, whatnot, or this is a third-party element you're not necessarily interested in testing. Again, we're talking about unit tests. So normally you want to have the behavior of your component and then that observable behavior you want to check against. So if there's a lot of third-party dependencies, you try to keep them out of the equation because it makes your tests less stable. By just updating the third-party library, it could mean that your test breaks for some unknown reason, even though everything works fine. So with a disconnected container, what we obviously can do is we can either define some kind of fake or a mock. So if you use add substitute or MOQ, you could just define that and just pass it in here. For the sake of presentation, I will just use a class. So I just put it in here. So I have my fake calculator. Yeah, it does the same. I mean, I could just always say like it returns 10 or something like that. And I have the ability to just put the fake calculator in here. And for the sake of being funny, I just add 10 now because why not? So this one should be 10 more. So it's 21. Because I feel very lucky today. So if we run the code, that's green. Amazing, isn't it? And that's the point. You try to decouple your first-party logic to any third-party dependency you have as much as possible. It doesn't mean necessarily you always want this, but if it's advisable or easy to do, because stuff can be hard to mock, stuff can be difficult to set up, and it also counts for JavaScript, then this is the better approach, at least for me, because that keeps it stable as possible.
Steven, I have one question. This server is a container that is accessible to us just because we are inheriting from the test context, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. Okay. That is absolutely right. So if I would just write base, as you can see, so that comes from the base class, and our base class right now is the test context. This is the only thing we are inheriting. This is the utility I meant earlier. This is what we bring with. Yes.
And the fact that we could mix the HTML kind of code and C# code in one place, same as Razor and like Blazor components, is because we are changing the SDK that we were using, and we had this add code block in here. So instead of like using normal C# files, we are using Razor files to write our tests, and then the compiler do the magic and like converts them into a C# file.
All right. Exactly. Cool. For folks that are really into like having the I guess somewhere here. Oh god. You can now. There is a magic compiler generated files. You can do something like that. What this thing does is you can really have a look into the generated files. Who is new to maybe source code generators? Basically, you have a pipeline, build pipeline, and one of the steps is somewhere the source code generator kicks in, creates something for you, and just puts it somewhere. Sometimes Writer is a bit nicer in the sense of it shows you here, but maybe it doesn't work.
You need to go to source generators, but yeah. This is
somewhere. Yeah, exactly. It's normally I have here on this level source code generator.
Let's not get sidetracked.
Yeah, but now I'm interested. I want to show you. It's very small. It doesn't matter. I make it bigger in a second. So I'm in the object folder, and in the object folder I'm in debug, and then you have here is a generated file. You have to go really down. There's a lot, but here. This is what the compiler does with a Razor file, and you might notice this name here. This is where it's coming from. And in the end, that's just a C# file. You can see this on the top here. And there is a lot of stuff. There's a lot of, like it seems very cryptic at the beginning, but this is what C# code looks like at the end. It has to be that cryptic to, that there's no conflict with your code, that it doesn't violate any of your style code rules or whatnot. But yeah. That's how it works under the hood. That's not bUnit magic. That's Blazor magic.
Amazing. Thank you.
Sure. Exactly. So this is something really cool. If you ever use something like Mapperly or so, they are using source code generators, and that's awesome feature. The last thing I want to show goes into the same direction of having third-party dependencies under control. I will start with something. Let's go in here, and I want to create my own beautiful button. Let's call that third-party button, because that's what I want to do at the end. Is I want to emulate how a third-party provider can break your stuff. So let's call that third-party button. I make it very, very simple right now. So I basically just really have a button. Click me. And I do have a parameter, which is basically just an event I can give outwards. So if I can write correct, it's always the event callback. Yeah, on click, for the sake of missing a better name. And then obviously what I can do is I can say on click. So that button does nothing. I know. Don't judge me. And instead of using this button down here, maybe we can even give those classes down here. Why not? No one is judging. Well, I copy pasted more than I wanted to. Anyhow, so from a markup point of view, if I now do this, let's call that, oh, here's something missing. You see, there is something missing. We could have the increment also in here, but F it now. So let's have my third-party button in here. And this one has an on-click event. And in the on-click event, we still just do this. We still do just increment count. Now, from a markup point of view, that is identical. I screwed up the text, but you get the idea. That's nice. If I would run my test now, it still works. So let's go to the first test here. I try to find a button. That button obviously is not in here anymore, but because we're rendering everything, it will find this component, will also render this, and will find the button in here. Cool. Now, if I do this and run that test again, it still runs. Yes. Okay, cool. Now, you didn't touch your code, and you felt, I want to upgrade my packages, because that's good practice, or you should update your packages. That's something you want to do. But unfortunately, the maintainer of that component library decided it's not a button anymore, it's an A element. Doesn't matter why, but he decided it's an A element. Technically speaking, everything you did is still working. Everything you programmed is still compiling, so there shouldn't be a problem. Well, let's run the test. If we do this, we see the following. No elements were found matching the selector button. Well, we could now, debug that. We can have a look. Let's go in here. And you can see if we go in here, the CUT, component under test, and I open the markup. Well, yeah, there's no button anymore. And this is literally what the Blazor compiler does, by the way. So you can literally see what Blazor is generating for you. That is obviously our A element, because that's what we changed. That's what the third-party button does now. That's not great, is it? Because now we are at the mercy of third-party vendors. That's not great for unit testing. So there are multiple ways we could fix that. Obviously, the first thing we could do is we can just make it an A element. Yes, that is true. But that also means you have to check the implementation of a third-party library. I'm not sure if you have the time and the fun to do so, because that might be taking a lot of time, depending on how big your application is. Or, and that's the alternative, we can provide fakes like we do here, but also on a component level. So there are two ways we can do that. It's also starting with services. And then we have, no, I'm lying. It's not services. It's not a service. It's called component factories. So this is our fancy name of telling, hey, we give you some kind of hook into the library or into Blazor itself. And there is these guys. These are the most important one. So a stub is basically, let's do this for now. It's basically an empty shell of something. So we could say every time you would render, oh, sorry, I know I'm a bit too fast. Every time you render a third-party button, render nothing instead. So let's do this. That doesn't obviously help with my test. That test is still not running. But what I want to show you in the markup is it's gone. When is this useful? Well, you often have some time, or here, let's here. You can see the A element is completely gone. We're not rendering it anymore. So when is this important? Sometimes you have a big component. This component has a lot of dependencies and setup, and it's easier for that specific test case just to say, hey, that third-party button has so much setup code, and I don't need this necessarily here. So just don't render it, and that you don't have to provide whatever it wants. Because here, that code, that button could also ask for some services you have to provide. So imagine you have inject, I don't know, random service, I don't know, random, I cannot write, random service. Then obviously you have to provide an implementation for random service if this is used or not. That is, yeah, not so great. So stub basically tells you, hey, just use an empty shell instead of the component that is the generic here. The alternative is you can just define your own button. So, and this is where the other thing comes into play. Instead of having add stub, we can just say add. And this asking for two components. So this is you can hover over the docs. It doesn't want to give me the docs because it's not compilable. For the sake of it, because it's stupid, I just want to show the documentation. You can see it here now. So you have your original component. This is this guy. It's very small here, T component. And the second one is the substitute. So every time the renderer hits on a third-party button, we take whatever is on the right side. Now, that doesn't make sense that I use the same component, but it allows us now to write our own component if we want to, and I will do this down here. So what I can do is I can have now my private sealed fake button. Let's call it like that. It's component base. And as you can see, it doesn't have to, oh yeah, it's a class. It doesn't have to even inherit from the third-party button. That's not important. From a Blazor's point of view, the only thing that is important is that your parameters match. It's depending on what you're doing, also interfaces, but let's say for 80% of the cases, it's only important that the public interface of the Blazor component is matching. And the public interface is always either a parameter, cascading parameter, supply from query parameter. You get the idea. This is important. It doesn't matter that there's a public void. Loop. As long as you're not using it, it doesn't matter. And I'm not great with my hero term. That's not compilable code. So this doesn't really matter as long as you're not using the instance. I can show that in a second how that is done. And oftentimes you don't want this. So cool thing. Let's go back. So this is the public property we want to have. Keep that in mind. Let's go back. And what we want to do is we really want to write our own component base. We could use now Razor. I just want to do it in C# because why not? You can see here this guy. This is the important bit. Build render tree. Now I just take this one. That's the same public API. And now I can just say, hey, I want to have builder add not components. We could maybe markup. We can add a content. You see, it's always a sequence, and then you can just do this. No, that's not right, but try your best. And then you can I just alt enter through? No, no. I just want to see what he's doing. So this is absolutely not true, but yeah, let's remove what GitHub Copilot is doing here. Let's remove this. Anyhow, what I wanted to show is what we can do is here. I use my fake button. Now, would this work? Absolutely not. Right now, it wouldn't work. There are two reasons. Reason one is I didn't define any markup, and I did this on purpose. And reason B is even if I have markup, I still have to invoke the onClick event. And now there are two options we can do that. We can, in theory, ask for that component. So let's show both approaches here. Let's remove this guy. What I want is I want to have the fake button component in our render tree. And it's super easy. Let's say fake button. And exactly that was correct. Find component. Find component is basically our way of telling, hey, look in the render tree, check if there is that component. And even with its state, so if it would have state, this one is stateless, we really retrieve the current instead of that thing. And now there's a bit of magic. Yeah, you can see there's an on-click. This is absolutely not true. What we have to do, and this is now a bit very advanced, but I wanted to show it anyway. We have to say invoke async fake button instance, and this is, as you can see, that is really the instance. And there you have the on-click event, and you could invoke that thing directly. Now, this is a lot of code, or that is probably also not very nice to read anymore. What are we doing here? Now, as you might know, Blazor is single-threaded. That is now very technical. That's we going down the rabbit hole here. So because it's single-threaded, it uses something called the synchronization context and has its own dispatcher. If you try from the outside world to invoke something on a component which affects the render cycle, you're out of luck. You will just get an exception. This guy will basically tell the renderer, hey, whatever you have, put it into that queue so it's thread safe and it's working as, the way it's intended to. And I know that's a lot of, weird code, but sometimes you have to resort to such stuff if you, provide your own code. Let's run that for a second. Oh, what did I do here? Woo! I did something very, very horrible wrong. And I'm even checking where it is coming from, because this one is not even remotely useful anymore. Let me just compile it again. Okay, interesting. I do not know what the heck is going on here. Did I not close something properly? It looks like compilable code to me. Anyhow, okay. I will not find this out in the next 5 minutes. Oh, wait. Do I? Can I do this? No, it's not this line of code. I do not know where this is coming from right now. Am I just stupid? That looks compilable to me. Event callback. Probably if I remove this one, then it's working. Obviously, it's not compilable anymore, but what happens? I just want to see what's going on. Now, I feel like I did something which I should not have done. And I'm not sure. So I'm running on a .NET 10 preview right now. I'm not sure if this was a very, very good decision from me.
I mean, there is an exception, like an item with the same key has been added. Could it be like some component name duplicates? I think it comes from emitting the file, right?
That could very well be. The funny part is I thought like maybe I have somewhere a duplicate, like there is a duplicate, but well, I do not know where that guy should be. This seems correct, so I do not know. That is very unfortunate. So I could just clean it, rebuild the solution. What happens? So if there's a real duplicate, I could just go to the release build and check if the release build does anything else. Yeah, interesting. Okay, it does. I just switch now between the release build and not release build.
Yep.
I do not know what's going on, but thanks for the hint. That's good. Where are my tests? Here, my test. Does it execute that in debug mode? No. So as you can see, this is working now, but it's not so nice. And the other thing you can do, again, we are in Blazor. You can just create your own component. So now this is my fake button. My fake button has a button. Why not? No one cares. We have the on-click event. So I just steal that from here and do the on-click here. And no, not that, but close, Ryder. It was very close what you tried. I'm proud of you. And do this one. So that's my fake button. It's a Razor component and I can use it. That's cool. So if I go back to my test, instead of this mumbo jumbo I did here, exactly, let's remove this guy because we have now two fake buttons. I can resort now to the old version, to my original old version. Now, here, I obviously would have to say button because I gave it a button. That is what I did. So if I go in here, you can see it's a button. And now I could just run the test again. Whoop, Oh, element doesn't have an event handler for onClick. Oh, I'm pretty certain it has, but you know, why not? I'm not sure what it's if it's the latest and greatest state. I'm pretty certain there's an on-click event handler. So that's what I meant. Not necessarily click means click as a physical click, but more as a invoke the on-click event handler. Which this is, but you know. No, I'm stupid. You know, don't let me code. Click. Yeah, obviously I have to also invoke that guy. That's not even compilable code I wrote. This should now work. I'm not sure why my IDE is not saying anything. Ah, boy. Dear IDE, please, I know that is compilable code because otherwise you would complain way more. It's interesting. He knows that even, but still doesn't this. Oh, okay. In theory, this should work. I have major problems right now with my IDE. Because this same code worked earlier in our counter component, because if you look in there, in here, that's just literally the same, just there was a button and now I use onClick. I do not know why this should be any different, but you know, the gist is that if it would have worked, there would be fireworks in the background and whatnot. Unfortunately, it did not. The important thing to take away here is that you will bring all the third-party dependency, which might be very unstable or hard to set up, entirely under your control. That is the idea of having these component factories and giving you the opportunity to say, like, hey, I don't want to have that third party button. I want to, for example, have that fake button. That is the idea. And we would render that guy instead of this guy. That's the whole idea here.
We did here with the fake button is that we said that we are not interested in how the implementation detail of this fake button is. We are interested in the public behavior of this fake button, right? Which is the click handler, and we want like to invoke it in our tests.
Exactly. So interested normally you would be if there would be, I don't know, something like this is I don't know, string like classes or so. I don't know. I just make things up right now. You would obviously have something like that. And the thing is that depending what you're doing, you should have the same public API now also in your fake button. So you should also have the parameter here. But this is only really important if you really use them. If you don't use them, you know, be fair, that's absolutely fine. But we always recommend like have at least the Blazor public interface. What I mean with that is if you have something, I just make things up now. Reset does absolutely nothing. You do not have to have that method, even if it's called here, because we are entirely removing this code from the render tree and using this code. That's the basic idea.
Okay, understood.
Perfect. Given that I'm almost out of time, you can read all of this on bUnit.dev. So we have a very, very, very extensive documentation, which also goes through that stuff. So if you look for components here providing substitute demodeling components, you will literally find the same thing here again. So we try to put a lot of effort in this documentation. So if there's a question, more often than not, here is the answer. And if not, then we have to extend that. Perfect. On time.
Yeah, quite on time. I mean, what could we expect from someone from Switzerland? I mean,
True that.
Yeah, amazing. It was a very great session. If there's any questions from the audience, feel free. We still have like a couple of minutes to spare for the questions. If not, then I would like to thank you again for being with us and being on this stage.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, sure. And I hope the audience also enjoyed it, starting with the Blazor and finishing with the Blazor. It's an amazing technology, and hopefully people that are using it now know how to test their components. One question from my side: is there any things that contribution factors? When should I test my components, and when should I just ignore, best practices for when you decide to go for testing a component or when not?
So it depends what you define as a component, obviously. If your component has critical, or let's say in some way or another, business code, domain code, absolutely go for it. In an ideal world, if you move it out into its own layer, testing just the shell itself probably doesn't make much sense. You just maybe want to check that something, gets started, but that's all. The picture shifts a bit if you're component library maintainer. Obviously, you want to check a lot of internals, and that is absolutely fine. But if you already resort to moving out your logic, and it really depends on the size of your application. So my blog, for example, there is no domain layer, given that I don't have much of a domain. It's so simple that I feel like, okay, I have domain objects, but they're rather dumb. Much of my logic is literally inside the Razor file, and that's what I test. That's why I have an extensive suite of tests. Yeah.
Understood. Okay, there is one request from Stefan. It's perhaps a brief sneak peek into bUnit version 2. I mean, we could
that's
a couple of minutes as well. So if you want to,
we
go for it.
Fair. That's good. That's a good question. So we're teasing this since a year, and we are really behind schedule, and we are very sorry. But the basic idea of V2 is we want to have a lot of cleanup. And that starts literally with the fact that we don't want to call stuff like test context. Test context is a bad name, not because of test or not, but if you use, for example, XUnit also has a test context, so that's not great. So we aligned a lot of the naming. So in V2, that would just be bUnit context. That's how we call it. Furthermore, we wanted to wrap up a lot of the APIs. You might have seen that here is a render. We have here render component. That's not great. Why not having just one simple render method? We have somewhere, and now I have to lie. Now I have to go to the GitHub account, and I make it bigger in just a second. We have on the V2 branch, which we regularly push, so there are preview versions out. But obviously they're preview, so I cannot tell necessarily that everything is working. We are in a pretty good state, and we started to add more and more features. So we removed some stuff. We made the public API a bit better. Renamed a lot of things. I'm just thinking of we removed a lot of the abstractions. We removed support prior to .NET 8 because it took us a lot of effort. We still in V1 support .NET 3.1 for backwards compatibility reasons. So yeah, that costs us obviously maintenance costs. And we try to onboard more and more new features, which were really expensive to do in V1, but we're doing this in V2. One of them is, so if you have, let's go to the counter component. You can obviously pass in parameters from here. Yeah, something like that. And you don't, so if you do a navigation manager route, so if you route to that via our own navigation manager, and you would go to counter/2, your expectation is that that value is 2. In V1, that's not the case because we didn't do this. V2 will be the case. So there's a lot of cleanup. You will be able, going from an element back to the component. Right now it's a one-way street, but we want to make it traversal. So we have some plans, and we want to expand, and we want to, support .NET 10, whatever comes there.
I hope that answers
to be released soon.
or if not, if you have more questions, I'm pretty much sure you could go on the GitHub page and open a discussion and ask.
Yeah, exactly. There's discussion, there's issues, whatever you have. Feel free. We try to be as responsive as possible. Yeah. Sometimes life comes in the way, and then you have to wait a few days. But we try our best.
Yeah, amazing. Then thanks again.
Thank you very much.
I would like to ask people to go to microsofthero.com. You could see our schedules for the month of August. We have very diverse topics there. Also, we'll talk about event-driven architectures and event-driven topics and a lot of stuff. So go and check for yourself. And thanks, Steven. Wish
Thank you very
everyone
much.
a nice evening or morning, depends on where you are. And see you next week.
Bye-bye.